Welcome to a very interesting discussion on one of the most recent cases which have created some sort of a stir in the international tax community. Uh, Misuse of treaty benefits, the case of Tiger Global and the India Mauritius treaty. And we must all understand uh, that as much as a DTA is for double tax avoidance, it is also to ensure that tax evasion is not being promoted. And the reason why we are having an introduction in this perspective is to set the context of this particular decision and why it is very interesting to understand the revenue and judiciary's thought process while interpreting bilateral treaty benefits. So moving on, I would thank Subhash and Jugal for their efforts because the decision actually came about early this week, and the document was published only yesterday. The real decision was out only yesterday. These are some of the terms used. Most of it is what we've seen, and some of it are abbreviations for the companies which are part of the transaction. So we shall look at them as we move on. This is the agenda. We would look at a brief overview of what indirect transfer is and how the scenarios have been misused in the past, facts of this particular case, the contentions of both parties, and how the judiciary decided the way it actually decided in this transaction. So if we look at it, friends, an offshore indirect transfer typically involves the disposition of an indirect ownership interest in an offshore entity, either wholly or in part. Now, if you look at it, India was notorious globally for the decision uh, in the case of Vodafone, where the revenue thought an indirect transfer was supposed to attract tax in India, and subsequently the judiciary thought otherwise. And then the government, the legislature clarified its position with retrospective effect. So if you were someone, if I were to go to the Vodafone example, you had a string of Mauritius companies which were held by a Netherlands-based entity, and the downstream, the ultimate company was an Indian entity in India. So I'm sorry, it was held by a Hong Kong-based entity. The Hong Kong-based entity sold the shares of a Mauritius companies to a Netherlands company, which is Vodafone, and consequently, the ownership of the Indian entity, thanks to the downstream entities, changed. The government said this was taxable because the ownership came from assets in India. The revenue said, I mean, the SSC said, no, we have a treaty with Mauritius, and indirect transfer was not envisaged in that treaty. So finally, the judiciary thought yes, the treaty had a very clear way in terms of ensuring even indirect transfers would get attracted. That's why effective 1/4/2017, the source-based taxation rules has also been introduced under the Indo-Mauritius Treaty. Consequent to which, even if indirect transfers happen, India would have a right to tax. Section 9 was amended accordingly with retrospective effect. And this became an issue where even OECD introduced this G20 OECD project on BEPS. So, coming back, so even the OECD set up the G20 OECD project on BEPS, which effectively focused on erosion of tax base, consequent to using various abusive structures. So, which is when this concept of indirect transfer has been globally discussed, and more importantly, from if you look at jurisdictions like India or even US for that matter, loads of tax evasive mechanisms have ensured that huge of billions of dollars of taxes have evaded those jurisdictions. So now, when developed economies lose their tax base, the actions are actually swift vis-a-vis what happens in the case of developing or underdeveloped economies. So coming back, if you look at a typical offshore indirect tax structure, you would have the case of this is just an example what we have taken. A company is in jurisdiction one, which is a low tax jurisdiction. You can look at Singapore, or no, I wouldn't even actually say Singapore, say Mauritius or Cayman or any of these jurisdictions. it transfers shares in company C, which again is in a different jurisdiction, which possibly is also a low tax jurisdiction. And company C in turn holds shares in D, which is a high tax jurisdiction. Now, if you were to transfer the ownership from company of company A to company B, which is in another jurisdiction, you would technically say the capital gain arises in jurisdiction 3. And if jurisdiction 3 is a tax haven or does not tax capital gains, the entire money goes tax free. Even though what has happened is the effective change in ownership of company D in, let's say, a high tax jurisdiction like India. This is a classic case of what happened in the case of Vodafone as well. Now, when we use the word tax havens, what are technically tax havens? One, you have huge tax exemptions, a jurisdiction where you have very high tax exemption. You have a lower corporate tax rate where source-based taxation is allowed. So the residents, the jurisdiction per se does not tax people on foreign incomes. Very liberal FDI policies, and even from a currency standpoint, there will be full convertibility. Um, and you have very low levels of compliance. So classic examples are Mauritius, Cayman, Singapore, Ireland, Hong Kong. Though it's not technically appropriate to put Ireland and Singapore in the same base, but yes, these institution jurisdictions can be categorized, at least from a capital gain standpoint, to be viewed as a tax haven. The most prominent, the double Irish example, what we've taken here. Imagine a company like Apple, which has actually cracked a very interesting IP, which can be exploited for billions of dollars. So what Apple does is, just before the IP is going to go commercial, it sets up a subsidiary in Ireland and sells it for a nominal amount. Let's say Apple has spent $100 million, he sells it to the subsidiary for $150 million, or licenses. I wouldn't use the word sell. Licenses it to its subsidiary for $150 million, payable over 5 years or 10 years or whatever. Now, the subsidiary in turn gives right, once the IP is commercial, it does the finishing part. It in turn licenses out the right to commercially exploit to Apple for manufacture of products and receives a royalty from the US company. Now, as far as the Irish company is concerned, it receives royalty on an ongoing basis, which is completely variable and is a function of how much Apple sells. But as far as Apple US is concerned, on the sale of its original license, it's a one-time fee, or the fee is agreed initially based on the cost taken for that particular IP. So here, the Irish company buys out the license from the same entity and gives it out for commercial exploitation, and a huge portion of royalty, which is claimed as an expense in US, is taxed and is income of Ireland, and for which it pays a very nominal tax. Same strategy has been adopted by Microsoft, Amazon, most of these companies, which is popularly called as the double Irish sandwich method. So to avoid all these transactions, or avoid try and bring these transactions to tax, we have what is called as the indirect transfer, where under section 9(1), which was amended thanks to Vodafone, all incomes accruing or arising, whether directly or indirectly, through or from a, any business connection in India, or through or from a property in India, or through or from an asset source in India, or through or from a capital asset which is situated in India. So when we look at a capital asset situated in India, that's where the conversation, what we're talking about, will make more sense. Subsequently, these explanations were added. Asset or capital asset being a share or an interest in a company incorporated outside India, the value of which is derived substantially from assets located in India, is deemed to be a capital asset in India. So if you have a Singaporean company whose value is effectively derived based on the investments in India, in shares of an Indian company, then that would come within the ambit of indirect transfer. However, it will not apply in the case of investment by way of an investment in an FII or a foreign portfolio, or under an FPI scheme made under SEBI Act. So portfolio investments are investments made in the stock market, and FIIs are technically foreign institutional investors. Now, when you look at explanation 6 to 911, so this made it mandatory for all indirect transfers to fall within the ambit of tax in India, and that created problems for small value transactions. And more importantly, if you notice, substantially it should derive value. What do you mean by the term substantial? These are all subject terms for interpretation. So, in this context, explanation 6 was added, which says that the share or interest is deemed to derive value substantially from assets in India if on the specified date the FMV of such assets without the corresponding liability, we're only talking about assets, is greater than 10 crores and it exceeds 50% of the value of assets owned by the company. So now we have a monetary threshold for substantial value. So this is the background. So if you have breached the monetary threshold for substantial value, then indirect transfer of assets will be taxed in India. Now, what is the new case of Tiger Global and AAR ruling? Why is it so controversial? Let's try and understand that. Got to look at all marquee names to the party. You have Flipkart, which is of course an e-com company incorporated in Singapore in 2011. So FDI regulations in India did not permit foreign inflow in multi-brand retail until 2018. This, hence, mainly for this purpose, the shares had to be registered in Singapore. So, which is why you would see Flipkart, ideally, if I'm not wrong, is a IT company, and it also has. It originally had WS Retail behind it, which was doing the merchandising part of Flipkart's activity. Then you had US retail giant Walmart, which had its subsidiary FIT Holdings in Luxembourg, and which was holding 77% stake in Flipkart. It was the acquisition what they have made, and the withholding on that acquisition is what we are talking about. Tiger Global, the three group entities of Tiger Global Management, a private equity firm in US, the group entities who are also the applicants of AAR and resident in Mauritius, together held 22% stake in Flipkart Singapore. And the applicants held investments only in Flipkart Singapore. So all the three applicants, so Tiger Global, which is a private equity firm in US, had entities out of Mauritius, different funds, which in turn owned 22% stake in Flipkart Singapore, which in turn had downstream Indian companies. If you see the chart, you would understand it better. This is a factual number of shares and the dates of acquisition by Tiger Global. So each of the fundraisings happened, and each of these funds acquired a certain percentage of shares at different points in time. This is how it looks. So you have a US fund which has three sub companies which held stakes in a Singapore company, and this was sold. The stake in the Singapore company were sold to a Luxembourg based company. And the value for the Singapore company is derived from assets located in India. So that's the Indian connection to the transaction. Now, if you were to look at India Mauritius Treaty, Article 13 of the DTA, now this is a transaction which happened, if I'm not wrong, prior to the amendment. But okay, the shares were sold, sorry, in 2018, so it is post amendment, but the investment happened prior to the amendment. So pre-amendment, the gains derived by a resident of a contracting state from the alienation of any property, including shares other than immovable property and movable property, forming part of a permanent establishment, shall be taxable in that state. When we say in that state, it's the state of residence. So a Singapore company shares are held by a Mauritius company, and the Mauritius company sells shares in the Singapore company. The capital gains will arise only in the country of residence, which is Mauritius company. But what you also must understand is the treaty also has a clause for prevention of tax abuse to check avoidance of tax evasion. So post amendment, what happened? Effective on or after 1/4/2017, the gains from alienation of shares acquired on or after 1/4/2017, and a company which is a resident of a contracting state may be taxed in that state. So, which means that it also has given a right to the country of source to tax that income. So that's where it happens. Now, if I were to look at the applicant's claim here, the applicant clearly stated Flipkart Singapore had in turn invested in multiple entities in India, and thus it derives its value substantially from assets located. So it crosses the 10% and 10 crore and 50% criteria. Hence, the DTA between Mauritius and India shall be applicable. Now, as investments made in Flipkart Singapore were made prior to 1/4/2017, the right to tax capital gain on sale of shares of Flipkart Singapore shall be with the country of residence, that is Mauritius. Thus, the transaction shall not attract capital gains tax. So, if I go back to the structure for your understanding, Flipkart Singapore is the owner of shares in Flipkart India, and 22% stake in Flipkart Singapore was held by three funds based out of Mauritius, and these funds in turn sold 17% of shares of Flipkart Singapore to a Luxembourg-based company. So the buyer is a Luxembourg-based entity, the seller is the Mauritius funds, and the assets sold is shares of Flipkart Singapore. The underlying asset for Flipkart Singapore was shares in Flipkart India. So this is the background of the transaction, friends. So now coming back, the applicant claims that yes, since the Indo-Mauritius Treaty held good, so there is no need for you to tax this money. Let's look at what the AO's contention and why AO rejected the application under 197. So an application was made by applicants to assessing officer under 197 for nil withholding tax on transfer of shares under the premise of benefits provided under the India-Mauritius Treaty. AO rejected the application stating that the applicants were not eligible for treaty benefits. Now, if you were to see, Flipkart Singapore had invested. So Flipkart Singapore is the applicant in this transaction. It's a Singapore company. So the AO rejected that, rejected the application, claiming that the applicants were not eligible for the treaty benefits as they were not independent in their decision making, and the control over decision making on of purchase and sale of shares was elsewhere and not in Mauritius. Thus, India-Mauritius Treaty itself will not avail, and only domestic law shall prevail. Now, basis this, the Indian tax law shall be applicable, and as far as sale of shares of Flipkart Singapore is concerned, we saw the provisions of Section 9(1) explanation shall now squarely attract. Hence, the transaction was liable to tax, and withholding tax has to be made. Now, what was the revenues argument? The revenue said that the organization structure of the applicant, which is Flipkart Singapore, were part of a wider web of entities, which was Tiger Global LLC, and the real control was in US. And here they figured out, they came up with their conclusion that Mr. Stephen Boyd, who is a non-resident US director, took all major decisions, and the ultimate control was with him and also with Mr. Charles Coleman, who is a founder partner of Tiger Global Management, and who were the authorized signatories of the principal bank account. Also, the authority to operate funds on transactions in excess of $2.5 lakhs, $250,000, was with Mr. Coleman, and the applicants had no control over their funds. And it was also found that Mr. Charles was not part of the board of directors of the applicants' entities. So, bare perusal of stat documents such as business licenses revealed that the beneficial owner of Flipkart was Mr. Coleman, who was the founder of Tiger Global. So, the revenue contended that this transaction was a colorable device involving avoidance of tax and hence should not be considered for the purpose of ruling. And they said this is going to be the withholding tax rates 6, 7, and 8.5%. So now the SSC felt it is appropriate to go to AAR on the following questions. Whether on the facts and circumstances, gains arising to the applicant, which is a private company, incorporated in Mauritius from the sale of shares held by the applicants in Flipkart to FIT Holdings would be chargeable to tax in India under the Income Tax Act, along with the India-Mauritius Treaty. What AAR's ruling holds a lot of weight here, and a very logically worded ruling. Of course, we all have our differences, but still. So the applicant's contention was the relief under Article 13 of the India-Mauritius GTA was available under the premise that the shares of the Singaporean company derived their value from assets in India. And India-Mauritius GTA Article 13 states that the gains derived by a resident of a contracting state from alienation of any property other than a specified property shall be taxed only in the state of residency. Now the AAR said, it's a very interesting observation. Even if the Singapore company derived its value from assets located in India, the fact still remains that what the applicants had transferred were shares of a Singapore company and not that of an Indian company. So the AAR's contention was an American company had invested in a Mauritius company, which had invested in a Singapore company, which had invested in an Indian company. If the Mauritius company had directly invested in India, there is a possibility that this relief could have been made available by AAR. But what the AAR now says that since it has gone through an intermediary in Singapore, it was the assets transferred were shares of a Singapore company and not that of an Indian company. And it made clear that the objective of Indo-Mauritius Treaty was to allow the exemption of capital gain on transfer of shares of an Indian company only, and not to non-Indian company deriving value from assets located in India. It's a fantastic interpretation of the situation. So whether the spirit of the treaty is followed or otherwise. But what the applicants have misunderstood is that even if the shares derive substantial value from India, it would mean that such shares are deemed to be situated in India but shall not per se be regarded as shares of an Indian company. Now that is the moot point here. Are shares of a Singaporean company which derives its value substantially from assets in India be deemed as shares of an Indian company? And that is where the AAR felt no. And if again I were to read the language of the treaty, friends, just above this, gains derived that shares of a Singapore, I'll just go back to the first. Applicants sought relief under Article 13 of India-Mauritius GTA under the premise that shares of the Singapore company derived its value from assets in India. And if you were to go back and understand that particular section or article, what we are trying to see pre and post amendment, it is gains derived by a resident of a contracting state from the alienation of any property, including shares other than immovable property and movable property forming part of a PE, shall be taxable only in that state. And here the understanding is the shares are of an Indian company. And the AAR very clearly said that shares of an Indian company are different from shares of a foreign company deriving its value substantially from assets in India. Now, control and management. The SSC's contention was the decision to invest into and ultimately sell the shares of the Singapore company was taken by the directors of the Mauritius company. And they further contended that the holding structure of the applicant has no relevance to determine whether the transaction was designed to avoid tax. Fair enough. This was the argument even in the Vodafone case. But if we were to look at the AAR ruling, the AAR looked at the case of a substance over form. What did it say? The control and management of applicants does not mean the day-to-day affairs of the business, but it effectively means the brain of the company. It is based on the resolutions and the documents available. It is clearly proven that Mr. Coleman is the decision maker in this transaction, and he is based out of US. And the holding structure, coupled with prima facie management and control of the holding structure, including the management and control of the applicants, would be relevant factors for determining the design for avoidance of tax. Since the real management and control of the applicants was not with their respective board of directors, but with Mr. Coleman, the beneficial owner of the entire group structure, The applicant companies were only see-through. So he said that Mauritius companies are only a see-through to avail the treaty benefits. Authorized signatories again. Here again, the government, the applicants were on a very loose wicket, where it was clearly stated based on documents that the ultimate authorized signatories were the directors who were sitting out of US. So you had Group A, Group B, and Group C directors. And for transactions above $250,000, it required either two signatories of Group A or one from Group A and Group B. So effectively, Group A held the veto on large value transaction. And the AR ruled that where it would have made sense if a local person based in Mauritius was appointed to sign the checks. The appointment of Mr. Coleman, who is a resident of US, who was a beneficial owner of shares in Flipkart to handle bank accounts, can't be considered as mere coincidence. It is also pertinent to note that Mr. Charles was also the authorized signatory for the immediate parent companies of the applicants. So all the bank account owners ownership was effectively with Mr. Coleman. And the AR further said that the AR stressed that though Mauritius provided similar benefits by treaties with different nations, the investment made by applicants till date was only in Flipkart Singapore, in respect of which India Mauritius Treaty is being claimed, DTA is being claimed. The real intention was only to avail the India Mauritius Treaty benefits, and the AAR also made a reference to the Vodafone International Holdings decision, and the revenue is entitled to disregard the form of the arrangement and recharacterize their equity transfer, something what we currently have under the GAR regime in India, what we call as the impermissible arrangement. The revenue submitted that the element of good faith needs to be retained for the applicability of treaties. Both India and Mauritius Treaty and India-US Treaty have captioned prevention of tax avoidance as one of their main purposes of DTA. And if you were to look at the case, friends, some of the important treaties, decisions which the SSC has produced. One was CAT versus Sakarlal Balabai, the 1986 decision. Here, the SSC was in receipt of an amount which was in reality and truth as income liable to tax, on which it avoids payment of tax by an artificial or colored device. The High Court said that in the context of gift of shares which was held to be bona fide, it is not a case of tax avoidance. This was a reason which was given to set aside the case. Similarly, Moody's Analytics, where it was held that capital gains arising to a Mauritius company on transfer of its shares to an Indian company to a foreign company are not chargeable. It's a straightforward foreign investment, Mauritius and India. It said that the facts are to be different because here we have a Singapore layer in between Mauritius. Golden Villa Holdings, again, interest income derived from investment in CCDs of Indian company was held as not taxable under the beneficial provisions of DTA between India and Cyprus. Again, here they said the facts were different as the investment was made in CCDs of an Indian private company. So, effectively, the AAR's perspective was if you have an intermediary layer in between Mauritius and India, you will not be eligible for the relief under the treaty. So, if you were to look at the final ruling, even if Flipkart Singapore derived its value substantially from assets located in India, the fact remains that what the applicants had transferred was shares of Flipkart Singapore and not that of the Indian company. The objective of the treaty was to allow exemption on transfer of shares of Indian company only, and any such exemption on transfer of shares of the company not resident in India was never intended by the legislature. So, fantastic insight. The actual control in this transaction was not also in Mauritius, but it was in US. The entire arrangement made by the application was with an intention to claim the treaty benefit, which was definitely not intended by the lawmakers, and such arrangement was nothing but an arrangement for avoidance of tax in India. Therefore, the application was rejected, and AAR did not pass the ruling for the question sought by the applicant, as in principle, the application was rejected on the basis of avoidance of tax. So this would definitely trigger a lot more decisions to deny. And if you notice, 25% of the recent FDIs have come from Mauritius. And therefore, the focus on substance over form is now actually becoming larger and more real than what we all thought it would be. So currently, the focus is on large value transactions. It's a question of time before it gets percolated down to smaller value transactions. So these were some of our thoughts on this particular very pertinent and interesting decision, friends. See you again. So any questions you have, we'll be more than glad to answer. Thank you.